Hi, Be Free. I'm Naomi Lieber, and today I'm going to take my turn in the hot seat. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll hear a few stories from within our church family about how God has worked through times of difficulty or suffering. To start that off, I'd like to share a story from my own life with you. I have 3 children. About 6.5 years ago, almost halfway through my second pregnancy, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. This was understandably scary. I had to learn a lot very quickly, and I had to make a lot of changes in my life. But God is so good, and even before I knew that there was anything wrong, He had placed some resources in my life that would later help me manage my disease and live nearly symptom-free. Despite many concerns and some extra tests, I remained stable throughout that pregnancy and had a smooth delivery with my healthy baby boy, my sweet Axel. A few years later, I became pregnant again, and I was so determined that this would be my golden pregnancy. Both of my previous pregnancies had been marked with turmoil, stress, and uncertainty, but this time it was going to be great. I was going to be so diligent in keeping myself healthy, and I was going to enjoy this pregnancy and savor the whole process. Well, that's not quite how it worked out. Once more, around halfway through my pregnancy, we realized that there was a problem. Despite the fact that I exercised daily and already ate a diet that would be recommended for blood sugar management, I had gestational diabetes. Despite all my best efforts, I ended up having to take insulin. This really messed up my plans. I would now have to give birth in the hospital, which I did not want to do, and I had never done before. I would face the possibility of having my labor induced, which I was also very against. And I would have to drive to my midwife's office in Danbury twice a week for the entire summer. For so many reasons, including hormones, I felt like my world was falling apart. In my head, I knew that it could be a lot worse than it was, but my emotions were a mess. Suddenly, I was back in this place where I had no control, and I felt like my body was betraying me again. I couldn't understand why this was happening and how it could possibly be happening to me. I was living a super healthy lifestyle, so why was I having another complicated, stressful pregnancy? I was driving home from one of my appointments one day. It was a long drive, and I was listening and crying to some worship music. And I began to realize that all of these places in my life where I felt like things were falling apart were sources of pride. God had given me a gift. He had given me tools to manage my disease through diet and lifestyle changes, and those tools had worked well. But I had started to think of it as my accomplishment. I was so convicted in that moment. I had taken God's provision and perverted it into a source of pride. And there were other areas where I realized that I had a pride problem. I realized that all of these areas that I felt were going wrong in my life were actually places where God was removing those sources of pride. He was not going to let me get away with it, and He was taking away any claim that I could have to be proud. I was struck in that moment with the image of a gardener. You know, when you're pulling weeds out of the garden. Not a good gardener, but I do pull weeds sometimes. So when you're pulling weeds out of the garden, some of the roots go really deep, and you have to really, really pull. And as they come up, they tear and they pull at the ground and they bring up some of the dirt with them. And that was exactly how I felt. I had these weeds of pride in my life, and God, the faithful gardener, was pulling each one of them out. And as they came out, they pulled and they tore at my heart, and it was painful. In those moments in that car, I was so humbled. God turned my heart from being upset and frustrated at what I was going through to being thankful. I realized that the God of the universe was interested enough in me that He was doing this work in my life. He hadn't decided that I was good enough, and He hadn't decided that I was a lost cause, which He certainly had plenty of reasons to do. But He was still working to make me better, to make me a little more like Him, to sanctify me. The God who hung the stars in the sky, who can hold the oceans in one hand, He was still doing this pruning, refining work in my heart. When I was little, we used to sing this song, and it said, "He's still working on me to make me what I ought to be. It took him just a week to make the moon and the stars, the sun and the earth and Jupiter and Mars. How loving and patient he must be. He's still working on me." Friends, he's not done yet. There is certainly plenty more work for him to do, but I am so thankful and I'm so amazed that God Almighty is still working on me. And in that, I think we can begin to understand what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. "And he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That's why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'"